Mr. Greer, congratulations on your nomination. And back in, I think it was during the Clinton administration when China was admitted to the World Trade Organization. Is that your recollection as well?
It was the tail end of the Clinton administration, and I think President Bush signed the paper.
And the premise of that was that somehow China would become part of the rules-based international order. But the fact of the matter is China cheats, China steals our intellectual property, and they don't recognize a rules-based international order. Do you know off the top of your head what sort of tariffs that China imposes on imports into their country?
I do, Senator. So when it comes to tariff rates, their overall applied tariff rate on average is 7.5%. On ag products, it's 14%. But we know that this does not capture the full extent of the non-trade barriers and regulatory hurdles that they impose on our exports.
And they subsidize a lot of their government-owned enterprises, correct?
That's exactly right, sir. And it makes it very difficult for anyone else to compete. And it results in enormous overcapacity that floods global markets and our own markets. It's something that has been a huge factor in the deindustrialization of the United States, which we need to reverse.
Absolutely. Well, I think President Trump was the president who first raised this issue in a very dramatic sort of way, and I think he's exactly right to insist upon reciprocity as a principle. Do you agree that reciprocity ought to be the basic principle that that drives our trade policy?
So Senator, and I know you've been a leader on this issue with respect to investment flows as well with China, and you watch this very closely, so I appreciate your insights here. I think that with China, you know, reciprocity is one word we can use, right? But I also don't want them to fall into a trap where they say, oh, well, we'll have a 0% tariff on you, and they have other kinds of barriers. So I don't want that word to be misconstrued by the Chinese or anybody else. But I think we do have to have a balanced relationship. I think the United States has always been willing to have a balanced relationship with China, but there's Chinese agency in this matter, and they need to decide how open they want to be to us.
Well, your response reminds me of the conversation we had in my office, and thank you for coming by to visit. I talked to you a little bit about something that we're working on in the Banking Committee. Senator Scott, chairman of the Banking Committee, and others on a bipartisan basis, working on an outbound investment transparency law. We thought was going to be added to the continuing resolution or the National Defense Authorization Act, but I'm hopeful we can tee this up in a bipartisan way so that as policymakers and as a government, we understand what sort of financial investments are being made by the United States and our friends and allies in China, which are then being used by the Chinese government because there is this Chinese military-civilian fusion. Anything that's developed, let's say, in the area of technology that has to be shared with the military and with the Chinese Communist Party. Do you think it just makes sense that we should have transparency over investments being made in China that may well fuel the modernization of their military in a way that's a threat to the peace in the Indo-Pacific and beyond?
Senator, I think that having this kind of transparency is very important. In fact, again, I keep referring back to the Trump administration's policy memo on trade because it is so comprehensive and gives such a clear direction on these things. And one of the things it talks about is looking at current efforts around outbound investment to foreign countries of concern. And so I think consideration of this kind of control or data gathering information, I think that goes right along with exploring that.
Talk to me a little bit about the de minimis exception to duty-free trade between countries. I know the executive order that President Trump has signed has basically said we need to take a look at that. But one of the issues that I'm concerned about beyond just the trade issue is the use of this failure to inspect packages, let's say, that come into the United States via the U.S. Postal Service or some other carrier that contain fentanyl or drug precursors. Are you aware of this as a potential problem?
Yes, Senator, I'm aware of this. Again, this is something where the Trump administration has signaled that they want to look at this. And there are issues around that related to inspection, informal entry, where I think we need to be very careful that this is not a loophole that's being used for tariff evasion, counterfeits, fentanyl and other drugs, or simply to explode the trade deficit. I think we definitely need to take a close look at that.
Thank you, Mr. Greer.